in this. So tonight on the 23rd, amazing, of February, we continue the exploration of the Eightfold Path, the Noble Eightfold Path. We've been looking at the first two aspects of that, the wisdom aspects of that path, for a little while. And they are, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, we could go on and on with those. And the rest of the path follow very naturally from the practices and the understandings, conceptual and non-conceptual, that arise with right view and right thought, right understanding. With a clear understanding and real direct, intimate practice of suffering and its cause, and a real understanding of what impermanence really means, what cause and effect really mean, then right action, right speech, right livelihood follow very naturally. Tonight, we'll go ahead and look at what does right action mean. We'll also mention right speech, but we may do another one on that. Before I get into that, I just wanted to mention one other thing. In Thich Nhat Hanh's book, The Heart of the Buddhist Teaching, as he goes into the Eightfold Path, he does the first two wisdom aspects, and the third one he talks about is mindfulness, which is usually given as the eighth and the seventh of the eight, because he says it is so fundamental. Without it, none of the others are really possible, and it is the first factor of awakening as well. If you look at the 7 factors of awakening, the first one is mindfulness, and again, mindfulness informs the other 6. So we will wait and do mindfulness in its usual place in the sequence as it's usually given. But I do think it's worth noting how strongly Thich felt about giving that prominence, that we really understand that the practice of mindfulness is fundamental, is foundational to all the rest of what happens with the practices of the Eightfold Path. And I'll also use his thinking and writing to a large degree in terms of looking at right action, and we'll do that in the form of the 5 mindfulness trainings. I think I mentioned one time before, back in the days of the Buddha, if you wanted to join up and you said to the Buddha, what do I need to do? I want to do something specific to feel like I'm a part of the Sangha. And he did not say you must understand suffering and the cause of suffering. He said, you need to follow these 5 precepts. People would take these 5 precepts and become a part of the Buddhist Sangha. And here are the 5 precepts. So you should now be seeing the 5 precepts. Give me a thumbs up if you can see them. Okay, good deal. So there we go. Abstain from killing, abstain from stealing, abstain from sexual misconduct, abstain from wrong speech, and abstain from the use of intoxicating substances that cause inattention. You can note they're all put in the negative. Don't do this. Sort of rules of conduct. Very short statements. My understanding is that that's where it began. It was placed in fairly simple terms, and in some of the Buddhist traditions, this is still the way the 5 precepts are presented. And nothing wrong with that. I'm going to bring up now the 5 mindfulness trainings that Thich Nhat Hanh put up. I guess I need to stop it this way. Back to the other bit. Fairly early on in the course of the Plum Village tradition. Okay, so now you should have the 5 mindfulness trainings up. And he begins each of them with awareness. Or you might even say mindful of the suffering caused by the destruction. So he brings in seeing what is happening as a part of each of these. Aware of the suffering is the first few words of each of them also. It's awareness of the suffering that's caused by these things. So he also moves into a compassionate mode with these right off the bat. It's moved from a thou shalt not kind of method to be aware that these things cause suffering. It's a different approach. It's a different way of looking at it. And in each of the cases, a commitment is made. I vow to cultivate something. So moving through them again, aware of the suffering caused by destruction of life. So he goes far beyond killing. Aware of the suffering caused by the destruction of life. I vow to cultivate compassion and learn ways to protect the lives of people, animals, plants, and minerals. So again, it flips over from a negative type of a statement, negative not in terms of what it means, but rather placed in the do not category, to here's what we need to do. We need to cultivate compassion. Not only do we need not to harm things, but we need to learn how to protect things, protect ourselves, protect others, protect the lives of living creatures. And he puts in minerals there. I remember when I first saw that minerals aspect, what the heck is he talking about? The lives of minerals? That's an interesting concept. And where I first went with that, and kind of still do, is protecting the ocean, protecting the mountainside. The mountainside, of course, is living in large part, but beneath that is the rock, the skeleton of that mountainside, minerals. So he covers a very large, he paints with a large, wide brush. aware of the suffering caused by the destruction of life, about to cultivate compassion and learn ways to protect the lives of people, animals, plants. And the second one, which is do not steal. Again, aware of the suffering caused by exploitation, social injustice, stealing, and oppression. I vow to cultivate loving kindness and learn ways to work for the well-being of people, animals, plants, and minerals. And it's not too hard to see how exploitation, social injustice, and oppression is stealing from people who are experiencing those things. So again, there is the expansion of what that means. There is a movement toward the positive, cultivating loving kindness. So first he's cultivating compassion, now loving kindness, and learning to work for the well-being of people, animals, plants. So the first one we're protecting, the second one we work for the well-being of. The third mindfulness training, aware of the suffering caused by sexual misconduct, I vow to cultivate responsibility and learn ways to protect the safety and integrity of individuals, couples, families, and society. There are those same shifts again. First, there's the awareness of when this is done, or when I do this, suffering is caused. Let me cultivate a responsible way of dealing with my sexual energy. Protecting safety and integrity. Abstain from sexual misconduct has that potential in it, but it becomes very explicit and much more proactive as he plays. The fourth mindfulness training, which in the Eightfold Path is separate from actions, is right speech. But let's go ahead and say it anyway. Aware of the suffering caused by unmindful speech. So here we go again. We need, the mindfulness is front and center in all of these things. Awareness caused by unmindful speech and the inability to listen to others. I vow to cultivate loving speech and deep listening in order to bring joy and happiness to others and relieve others of their suffering. So once again, abstain from wrong speech becomes this very positive, active, caring, and compassionate way of looking at what comes out of our mouth. Starting with the awareness of the suffering that happens when we aren't. And the last one, which you may recall, abstain from the use of intoxicating substances causing attention, the way that particular tape was. Aware of the suffering caused by unmindful consumption. So he's already expanded. I vow to cultivate good health, both physical and mental, for myself, my family, and my society, by practicing mindful eating, drinking, consuming. So he's saying, it's not just alcohol or substances necessarily that cause inattention, intoxicate us, and cause difficulties with our judgment and all the things we know about. mindful eating, drinking, and consuming. Now I'm going to bring up one more time here. So here is an even later iteration of these mind trainings. I believe these were the ones that were present when I actually took the 5 mindfulness trainings, and that was back in 2005, I guess it was. And since then, there have been further expansions of these, but I'm sticking with these because they're manageable. But feel free, if you go on the Plum Village website and look up the 5 mindfulness trainings, the current version will be there, and you can see what other thought has gone in these different ways of looking at these things. And I didn't mention the 5 mindfulness trainings, and part of what he is saying by saying mindfulness trainings is that you're never going to get this stuff perfect. This is something to simply hold up as a way to think about things and perhaps a guide. It's not a precept in the terms of something that you break, although you can. But this helps us use skillful means rather than some kind of rote, okay, I'm not killing. That we think about these things, that the awareness is there, and they become trainings, an ongoing training that never ends. So now, aware of the suffering caused by the destruction of life, I am committed to cultivating compassion and learning ways to protect the lives of animals, the people, animals, plants, and minerals. In the previous version, he had said, I vow to cultivate compassion and so forth. In this one, the verbiage about the vow isn't there. Rather, the term is a commitment. And, we may be parsing words here. A vow is a commitment, and the commitment can be seen as a vow. But he puts the energy of commitment into the words here. Committed to cultivating compassion and learning ways to protect. And then he adds, I am determined not to kill, not to let others kill, and not to support any act of killing in the world, in my thinking, or in my way of life. I would have taken the 5 mindfulness trainings earlier than I did because I couldn't get around this. This one, how in the world can you not kill anything? And he always talks about people, animals, plants, and minerals. How can you live if you're not going to kill a plant? You gotta have supper, right? So I was just this speaks somewhat to what I think about it, kind of concrete here. I can't say those words because I can't imagine how one could live without killing in any way. Eventually, I kind of just said, okay, Ty's making a point here. This is a guide. It's impossible. And because of that, I can accept this is a North Star. I'm determined not to kill, not to let others kill, not to support any act of killing in the world. Boy, does that cover a lot of territory with a lot of controversy, depending on how you want to go with that. Then he says, in my thinking. And that one really got my attention. You know, there in the privacy of my mind, do thoughts of killing ever arise? Perhaps with a little bit of glee on occasion, depending on the subject matter at hand. That might be put a little bit too emphatically, but nonetheless, I noticed that I very often just let my mind go, but there it was. And what am I doing in my thinking? Even if I never say a word about it, even if it never comes out at all, even if no one else knows, there it is. So he's added that on. And then he moves down to the second mindfulness training, or we do. Again, we're aware of suffering caused by the factors that you mentioned before: exploitation, social injustice, stealing, and oppression. And the vow again has changed. I'm committed to cultivating loving kindness and learning ways to work for the well-being of those with whom I share the world, the earth. Then the next positive things come in. This was not in the one we read previously. It stopped right there. I will practice generosity. So there's a positive, proactive decision. I will practice generosity by sharing my time, energy, and material resources with those who are in real need. I think I'd probably cross out the word real in there, for those who are in need, but that's what it says. How can we decide who is in real need versus those who are not in real need? I can't do it. And then continuing, I'm determined not to steal and not to possess anything that should belong to others. Philip Toy, a mentor of mine from years and years ago, said, interesting. I say I own this land my house is on. Seems that back in the day, the native people had this land. And I don't recall us paying them anything for it either. Maybe this should belong to others. Where does this fit with this mind training? Well, good question. It's the kind of thing we tend to turn our heads from, say, oh, well, yeah. But there it is. And then he goes further again. I will respect the property of others, but will prevent others from profiting from human suffering or the suffering of other species on Earth. Boy, does that cover a wide swath. And how do you do that? And I believe that some of the later iterations of the mindfulness trainings speak to that a little bit. I'd have to go look at them, but I think that it does. And of course, to begin with, to be aware of others profiting from human suffering. We get into some of the more recent things is, we buy our $150 tennis shoes, or some people do, that are, made in factories where people are paid nothing or a few cents an hour. That's profiting from human suffering. Moving on to the third one, aware of the suffering caused by sexual misconduct, I'm committed to cultivating responsibility and learning ways to protect the safety and integrity of individuals, couples, families, and society. So again, that large expansion from oneself all the way to the society. And he adds, I'm determined not to engage in sexual relations without love and long-term commitment. And at one point, added onto that was, without love and a long-term commitment known to my friends and family. You couldn't have a secret tryst. But there were a lot of people that said, wait a second, there are people in long-term committed relationships that can't tell their families about them because their families would ostracize them or worse. So care has been taken to be inclusive in terms of sexual relations. It doesn't say anything about gender here at all. And I think they've taken out, I'm not sure if they have or not, known to family and friends. I can't remember if that's still there.
They took that out, Ken.
Thank you, Carol. As you can see, I'm behind the times. And then continuing again, to preserve the happiness of myself and others. So he goes beyond suffering aspects to bringing in, happiness and contentment here. Determined to respect my commitments and the commitments of others. I'll do everything in my power to protect children from sexual abuse and to prevent couples and families from being broken by sexual misconduct. So there's a challenge there. If we look at these things and ask ourselves, how am I doing with that? How am I doing with everything in my power to protect children from sexual abuse? It's an interesting question to ask and ponder. And then the fourth mindfulness training, the speech one. Aware of the suffering caused by unmindful speech and the inability to listen to others, I am committed to cultivating loving speech and deep listening in order to bring joy and happiness to others and relieve others of their suffering. That's what was said in the previous one. And then he adds, knowing that words can create happiness or suffering, I am determined to speak truthfully with words that inspire self-confidence, joy, and hope. I will not spread news that I do not know to be certain. Whoa. And will not criticize, let's cut these out, or condemn things of which I am not sure. I will refrain from uttering words that can cause division or discord, or that can cause the family or community to break. I am determined to make all efforts to reconcile and resolve all conflicts, however small. So again, quite a challenge there. And sometimes, in some situations, it may be the healthy or skillful thing to do to recognize there's a conflict that right now is not going to be resolved. Perhaps simply not being with someone who is perhaps being abusive, for example, that conflict isn't going to be resolved right now. Maybe the wisest course. So again, all these things ask us to think and to choose and to use skillful means to diminish suffering, to increase kindness, compassion, and well-being of various kinds. And the fifth mindfulness training. This is sometimes called the alcohol training, and very often is the one that really slow people down from taking the 5 mindfulness trainings to say, wait a second, I like my glass of wine with dinner. And then there's the discussions that happen. Well, it's really about the intoxication part of it and the judgment part of it. How is it put in the original? I put that one down already. Abstain from the use of intoxicating substances that cause inattention. Well, what if my wine is not causing inattention? And so on. So there's a great debate about that. I remember when I took the 5, it was still a little wobbly on that. When I took the 14, which has this also present, it made sense to me to really put that down. And for 10 years, I didn't even have a sip of champagne at a wedding. I just said, no, boom. And I've softened a little bit, just sharing my experience with it. But it's still very important. Not to allow myself to put myself in a position where I'm being affected adversely in some way. Consuming. And of course, he didn't say consumption of alcohol there either. So I vow to cultivate good health, physical and mental, for myself, my family, and society by practicing mindful eating, drinking, and consuming. Then he goes on, it's very interesting. I will ingest only items that preserve peace, well-being, and joy in my body, in my consciousness, and in the collective body and consciousness of my family and society. So it's not just avoid those toxins that look and appear and are clearly toxins, but only take in the things that really help. I am determined not to use alcohol or other intoxicants. Should be an S on that. Or to ingest foods or other items that contain toxins, such as certain TV programs, magazines, books, films, and conversations. Playing Ain't It Awful may be a form of unmindful consumption. Anybody not, I think I've talked about it before. Anybody need to hear what playing Ain't It Awful means? We're all good on that one. I'm aware, he sounds kind of Old Testament here in a way. I'm aware that to damage my body or my consciousness with these poisons is to betray my ancestors, my parents, my society, and future generations. I will work to transform violence, fear, anger, and confusion in myself and in society by practicing a diet for myself and society. I understand that a proper diet, and of course he means the whole thing, TV programs as well as what you eat, is crucial for self-transformation, for the transformation system. And there was one thing I would have added, and I don't usually like to add to these things. It's where he says certain TV programs, magazines, books, films, conversations, and my own thinking. Because once again, I'm quite capable of unmindful consumption of thoughts that arise that I then get on the train and play with. They're not helpful at all. Maybe a rant about something. Some very critical thing that jumps to mind that I can feel the energy behind to want to go ahead and enlarge on it, think about it, and all that can happen with getting into an internal rant. So I, for myself, I include that one. So here we are again. So that's Thich Nhat Hanh's take on the right action and also right speech. And those are just the mind trainings without commentary by him. If you read in the Art of the Buddhist Teaching, he expands on all of that in a way that I think can be helpful. So if you've not had a look at that, it's worth a look. And I will bow out and turn off recording.